Welcome back to Steel Bear Academy. I'm Jonathan. Today I'm going to be sharing with you some of my ideas about what I think is most important for 1911 features. So if you're thinking about buying a 1911, you're going to encounter a lot of choices in terms of the type of features of 1911s all across the market. So how do you decide what things are important to you, what things are not important to you? What are some of the pros and cons of different choices that you can make when you're selecting a 1911? Because lots and lots of companies make a 1911 and some have many packages of 1911. They're kind of like a configuration, kind of like buying a car. You know, you select the things that you want, which features you want. You want power seats, everybody has power seats nowadays, but you get the idea. The power windows, it used to be options were like, heaters and AC and stuff like that, leather seats, etc. It's kind of similar for 1911s, except there are far fewer options, I'd say, and they're pretty much well established across the board. There's not really anybody making something revolutionary. So we'll just go over a brief history of what a 1911 is. When we're talking about a 1911, we're talking about this style and look of a handgun. It came out around the year 1911. It was made by a guy named John Moses Browning, the design, and it was our U.S. military service pistol for a long time, like 60, 70 plus years, depending on when you think the cessation of it happened. It was largely replaced by the Beretta 92. I think in the 80s. Yeah, it's been around a long time. Most 1911s are chambered in 45 ACP. So they've got a fairly large diameter bullet. 45 ACP is a larger diameter caliber. Now, some people refer to 1911s as only that gun that is basically modeled after the M1911, the military's version that it was adopted all the way back in 1911. However, that's a pretty narrow definition. Most people's definition will say any 1911 style pistol. So this is a 1911 style pistol. It's made by Springfield Armory. This is called the Loaded with Parkerization. So Parkerization is the finish. Most people just refer to these as 1911s, but some really particular aficionados might say, well, that's not a real 1911 because, the blah, blah, blah has a, flared ejection port, or, who knows what definitions they're going off of, but by and large, this is what we're referring to. So like every pistol, I think that the first thing you should decide is, what is your role going to be? Meaning, what role are you asking this gun to fill in your collection's needs? And each role has different requirements. So let's say you want to carry it, a CCW, let's say, or a license to carry. You want to carry this on your person, either concealed or openly. Well, for concealed carry purposes, you want a gun that is lightweight, that it's not too large, that it's easy to conceal. And, you want improvements over the basic 1911 that's usually made of all steel. Typically, maybe you'd want an alloy frame, etc. Those are things that you're looking for in a CCW roll. If you're looking for a collecting roll, like you just want to collect it as part of your collection, well, that's totally subjective. You could want something of every type. You could want something of all the same finishes. You could want something of all the same manufacturers, etc. There's really no way to narrow it down for you, but I think generally people when they're thinking of collecting, they're thinking of generally higher quality, meaning they want something that is very durable and maybe beautiful. And price is usually less of a factor. When you're thinking of CCW, price is sometimes more of a factor because you might lose that gun. It's going to get beat up, banged up around as you're carrying it every day. A third role might be range or competition. So those are, if you're looking for a range type 1911, you're looking for things that are ergonomic improvements and shooting improvements. Things like that would be typically sights, maybe some lightning cuts on the slide, maybe you know, the extended Beavertail. We'll talk extensively about this. Generally looking for things that are improvements to the shooting characteristics, and weight is usually not a concern at all. In fact, more weight is usually better. So you want to think about what's your role going to be for this gun, as you should for every gun, I think. So let's get into some of the features that you're going to encounter when you're choosing which 1911 to buy. And I have a bunch of features here that we're going to just kind of talk about real quickly. Every 1911 has the option of having most of these features, and some will choose to have some, and other makers will choose to omit some of these features. So number one you want to consider is caliber. This is probably the most important feature of any gun you choose. What caliber does it shoot? Most 1911s shoot 45 ACP. However, there are other calibers you can shoot. 9mm is very popular, 38 Super, there's even some 40 Smith & Wesson, there's 10mm, there's even a 357 Magnum 1911. But by and large, most 1911s are chambered in 45 ACP. 9mm is popular, but I'd say by and large 45 is the most popular. So that's one choice you're going to have to make. I would say, based on my opinions, I'd probably pick the 45 unless I could get a 10mm. I'd choose 10mm. I think 10mm does everything that 45 can do, and more. That's just my opinion. If you want something classic, get 45, and it's also a little cheaper to shoot, and it's a little lower recoil. But caliber is the first choice. Your second choice is going to be the finish of your gun. So this is parkerized, and there are lots of different finishes. So parkerized is basically like a finish that is kind of black like this, and it absorbs oil. So you would keep this gun oiled and it would be fairly rust corrosion resistant. There's also stainless, which is this material. This is a Glock 34 barrel, or 34 slide. This is stainless. You've probably seen stainless steel before. You can also get blued 1911s. Those are kind of like polished, nice, pretty, shiny, reflective versions of this coloring. And there are other ones as well. You could get Cerakoted or Duracoated. Every maker has their own version of some sort of finish, typically some sort of paint finish. This one's parkerized. I find that my choices between the most common types of finishes are stainless and parkerized, let's say, and blued to some degree. But I would say, I think stainless has a significant advantage in corrosion resistance, and many slides are actually stainless steel with a coating over them, so you kind of get the best of both worlds. The problem with stainless is that it's fairly reflective, and that makes it kind of stand out more. If you're doing a concealed carry roll, maybe you don't want it to be as reflective. It's a possibility. I'm just giving you some ideas. I like stainless steel, but for me, I wanted the more black classic look. And, kind of at the end of the day, it's really an aesthetic thing. Parkerizing is decent. However, it is going to show wear. So you see I've got a little bit of, hopefully you can see I've got some scratches along the gun. It shows wear. Stainless steel does not show wear as badly. You can get rid of a lot of imperfections with sandpaper and polishing compound. So stainless steel is much easier to fix cosmetic blemishes as well. Second thing third I should say, thing you're gonna wanna think about is what material and what is the process for your frame. So the frame of your gun is this piece right here. It's this metal piece, and it basically is the front strap of the grip, and then it's the thing that everything else connects into. It's kind of the receiver of this gun. So underneath the grip panels, this is part of the frame. What material this is made of is pretty important. Not only the material, but also how it is made. So there's kind of 2 points here. One is most 1911s have a steel frame made of all steel. You can also get other materials. So aluminum is a common, or some aluminum alloy is a common alternate material. If you were concerned about weight, meaning you want something lighter weight, then aluminum might be a good choice for you. However, by and large, most 1911s are made of steel. And I personally would rather have steel, just personal preference. There's nothing wrong with aluminum alloy, but I don't know, I just would personally rather have steel. I think that most frames, whether steel or aluminum, will far outlast most people's shooting habits. However, steel will definitely last longer than aluminum, except it doesn't have the same rust preventative qualities. Aluminum doesn't really rust. It can get pitted, but it doesn't rust the same way that steel does. So if you live in someplace very humid, maybe stainless steel would be the proper choice for you. Proper meaning wise choice for you. The metal also can be either forged, meaning the frame can be forged, or it can be cast. So forging is, I don't know exactly the process, but it's basically like it starts off as kind of a hot piece of metal, and then they beat it until it kind of gets the basic shape, and it adds in strength along the way. Whereas casting, I think you make the metal into a molten material and then pour it into a mold, and that's the way you would create the basic shape. And then from there it would start going into finishing, like, finishing off, making sure there's no marks where the molten material would flash outside the mold. That's my basic understanding of it. Some people really like a forged frame. This is a forged frame on this gun, and this is one of Springfield Armory's main things that they really advertise, is they all have forged frames in all their 1911s. I don't really think that it's a super big deal, but casting generally has lower strength than forging. You typically, like for example, in the Ruger revolvers, typically the forging has to be the casting has to be a little thicker in order to make up for the lack of the lesser amount of strength, whereas forging can be a thinner material, let's say. I'm not a metallurgist, I'm not an expert on these things, but that's my basic understanding of it. However, I don't want to say that there's anything wrong with casting frames, because there are lots and lots of 1911s that have it. I think forging is just a little stronger. So if something being a little stronger is important to you, then I'd say forging is the way to go. And typically 1911 makers will advertise if it is forged. If they don't advertise that it's forged, it's probably cast. I believe all the Rock Island Armory 1911s are cast frames, or at least as many as all the ones that I've seen and have seen are all cast frames. The Springfield, I believe, are all forged frames. And I think many of the higher end 1911s are forged frames as well. So if that's important to you, then you'll want to choose the one that is to your liking. This next one is kind of an interesting one. Kind of requires a little bit of stepping back into time. The original 1911 was not drop safe, meaning if you dropped the pistol in such a way, typically on the barrel, the firing pin that is sitting or resting or floating inside of the slide here, it wasn't being held back by anything, so inertia could make it fire if it was struck on the in such a way to make it so that the firing pin moved forward. It could go off and fire. It's not drop safe is what we call that. Same thing, I believe, could apply if you, well, I don't think this is, I'm not sure about this part, but things that are not drop safe, typically you have to be careful not to hit the hammer down toward the firing pin. So on this gun, the firing pin is floating. However, it has a different mechanism by which it is drop safe. So before we get into that, drop safe. one of the fixes that you can do to make something drop safe, one of the fixes to make this 1911 drop safe, is you can add a firing pin block. Now, a firing pin block on the 1911 is typically referred to as a Series 80 slide. And a Series 80 slide basically means that there's a few extra parts that get added into the slide here. One of which would be a little plunger, much like this Glock here, that little circle right there. That little plunger is a firing pin block. So a little lever pushes on that firing pin block to get it out of the way so that the firing pin can move forward. If for some reason the firing pin released itself, it would just get caught by this block. It couldn't go forward and hit the primer. So that little circle on a Series 80 1911 would be present on the back side of the slide in here. This is one of the ways you can see if your gun is a Series 80. There would be one of those little circular plungers back here, kind of in the middle here. So you can see on this one it does not have it. This is what is typically referred to as a Series 70. That's Colt's designation. Colt was kind of the original manufacturer of 1911s. They're, I think, the only, if you want to get technical with the name, they own that name, I think. I think they call them a Colt government model, or, I'm not sure exactly what their naming designation is, but Colt's the original Big Daddy on 1911s. And that's what they used to differentiate those guns that had a firing pin block from those guns that did not have a firing pin block. So I think it's a fairly important upgrade. The problem is that when you add in those extra parts, people say that it adds in, one, extra complexity to your gun that maybe you don't want, extra parts that can break, and two, it adds in some grittiness to your trigger that people who want the 1911 are typically choosing the 1911 because they want that really nice crisp trigger. And so that Series 80 is counterproductive to having a nice crisp trigger. There's another way you can do a firing pin block that is based off of the grip safety. I believe that is called a Schwartz safety. And some 1911s do that because they want to get that same drop safety, but they don't want the added hindrance on the smoothness of the trigger by adding in those, I think it's like 4 extra parts. It's basically like a little series of levers that push up on one of these little firing pin blocks, just like on the Glock. Not exactly the same, but pretty similar. So I would say that it's an upgrade to have the firing pin block, but if you can get the Series 70, you'll have a little bit better trigger. Now what Springfield Armory does is they kind of do a different route. So instead of having a firing pin block, instead what they do is they have a titanium firing pin, and a titanium is a much lighter material than stainless steel or steel, and so it doesn't have that inertia to hit forward just by gravity. Let's say, if you have gravity and that sudden arresting of movement won't allow that firing pin to keep going forward and strike the primer. Now, my understanding, in order to compensate for that protection, they also have to have a heavier mainspring. So they have to have a heavier spring to have the hammer strike with more force to get that firing pin to move forward as well. Thus also adding in some extra weight to your trigger. So there's some pros and cons there, but at least you don't have the Series 80 firing pin block on this particular gun. I don't have enough experience shooting 70s and 80s to know if there's really a big difference, but this one's trigger is very nice. So I will say that despite it being perhaps a little bit heavier than some 1911s in terms of trigger weight, it is very crisp, and I don't feel any grittiness or anything like that. So maybe on those Series 70s, I assume that's it's a bigger deal than I'm understanding, but it is something to think about if you don't want the firing pin block via Series 70. or via Series 80, sorry. The Schwartz solution probably also has some drawbacks. I'm not sure drawbacks on that, but I haven't heard as many companies using that as much. I think Kimber did at some point, but I'm not sure. You'll have to correct me if I'm wrong on that one. Next thing I think is important is the trigger reach. So I'm going down a list of I've numbered these important features in terms of kind of things that can't really be changed. So those first 5 things, you are buying a 1911 that has those features built into it. You can't really change those very easily. Like, you can't change the material, you can't change the forging or casting process, you can't change the caliber unless you completely basically buy a whole new gun in terms of parts. So from here, we're starting to get into things that you can change. And this next thing is trigger reach. So on a lot of 1911s, this is kind of a medium to longer reach trigger. So what that means is when your finger is resting on the trigger, it's hard to get a good grip on this and show you. When your finger is resting on the trigger, where exactly it lines up on the pad of your finger is partially going to be dictated by the length of the trigger. So imagine if this trigger was further back, like it didn't have this extra piece where the holes are. If it was further back, I could therefore get deeper onto the trigger and get closer to this joint here. Now, this is changeable. You can buy other trigger assemblies and trigger shoes, but this is kind of getting into you might as well just buy one that fits you from the get-go. So I'd say make sure you actually rest your finger on the trigger and hopefully dry fire your gun, safe direction, gun unloaded obviously, at the gun store before you decide, do I want that particular gun? Does it fit my hands? And trigger reach is not just a function of how far the trigger is, how long the trigger is, but it's also a function of, is there cutouts right here that are, I believe these are indicative of an A1 style 1911. There's lots of history that you can get into about these, but almost all 1911s have this cutout here. So it gives you a little extra ability to get that trigger reach without rubbing your finger on a piece of metal there. And the grips are also going to factor in a little bit, but really this dimension, the dimension of the length of the cartridge is really the factor. So, think about it, make sure your gun fits you where you want it to be. So trigger reach. The next thing I think is really important, and this is kind of the thing that I think is more important than almost every other feature on a 1911 that I think you should get, is the extended Beavertail safety. So this is called a grip safety. What that does is this gun has two safeties. So this safety is typically called the manual safety. You turn it off like that to fire. While it is engaged, you can't pull the trigger. As soon as you swipe it off, you can pull the trigger. You also have a grip safety here. So if it's off safe, ready to fire, I can't pull the trigger until I disengage the grip safety as well. Now, on the original 1911 and the A1 right after it, you had kind of more of a squared off grip safety, that it didn't have this little swoop here. This is an upgrade. So typically we call these extended Beavertail safeties. Beavertail is the name we give to this piece right here that swoops down that would rest inside the web of your hand. Now, it might seem like this doesn't seem like it's that big a deal, but for me it was actually a huge deal. It really changed the characteristics of the gun. So on a GI style, which basically juts out like this, and it's shorter, so it doesn't have this swoop up right here. It just kind of ends right there. Kind of ends like right about there. With that type of safety, I found that it kind of battered my my webbing of my hand a lot more. This type of safety with this swoop really spreads out the recoil a lot more pleasantly in my hand. So this is a necessary upgrade if you ask me. Now for those who are more purist, who want the more classic look, there are 1911s that have the GI style, like, you know, standard grip safety. There are guns like that for you. Rock Island Armory has several. The Springfield GI series has at least 2 that are like that. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just, I like my guns to be more pleasant to shoot, and this is one that definitely improves the pleasantness of shooting. It's also got a little bump here, this little swoop that comes up here. This little bump basically just makes it so that it's more consistently disengaged when you put your hand on it, if that makes sense. So definitely an upgrade that I think is a must for any 1911. Now, when you buy one of those GI ones, this is not really a drop-in part. You have to have a ringed hammer like one of these to be able to use this type of safety. So this ring is important. Many GI style ones have like a spur that kind of comes out like this, so that you're much easier to fan the hammer back with your thumb. This one can slip out of your hands. So this isn't really meant to be manually fanned back very often. So my point is, you can change many things on the 1911, and you could change a regular Beavertail safety to this extended one, but you're gonna have to mill out part of the frame. You're gonna have to fit this safety to your new gun. This is one area where I think you should definitely just buy it as you want it. And I think it's the most important feature to get on your 1911. Next thing you want to think about is flat versus arched mainspring housings. So this is the mainspring housing. It's basically like a little piece right here. You see that? This piece is removable, and inside of it has a mainspring, and the mainspring basically is what pushes back on your hammer when you release the trigger to allow it to fly forward. Now on the original 1911, you had a flat mainspring housing like this. On the A1, what we would typically refer to as the A1 style, it has a arched mainspring housing where it kind of arches like this. And that basically pushes against your wrist here and tends to make you, I guess, point the gun upward a little bit more. It's not a pro or a con, it's just something to think about. Some people much prefer the feel of the flat mainspring housing in their hands. Other people prefer the arched mainspring housing. So you can also get mainspring housings with or without serrations. So this one has some nice deep checkering in it, which is nice back here. It's not sharp that it hurts your hand, but it's nice. I think that this is a very well done mainspring housing, and I like it. The next thing you want to think about is your safety, whether it's ambidextrous or not, and the profile of it. So as I stated, this is your safety, and on this one it is ambidextrous. So you see it's on both sides. It can be pushed on either side. Now typically for a right-handed shooter, you'll swipe it off like this. For a left-handed shooter, you would use your other thumb, swipe it on and off like so. Some people as right-handed shooters don't want it on the other side. It kind of gets in the way of your firing hand a little bit, maybe. It could. I don't really find it does for me, but if you got big meaty hands, maybe it matters. It is a added benefit if you ever need to shoot left-handed, off-handed, then you have the option of using your other thumb. I think that it is a good feature to have, however, not super necessary. On the GI style, this is what is called an extended safety. You see it kind of swoops out like this. This is, I think, absolutely necessary, absolutely critical. You definitely want some extended safety, because on the GI ones, they don't they don't go past, they're just this piece right here, this part that doesn't jut out. It'll have a little shelf for you, like right here, but it doesn't jut out enough that you can easily swipe it off. And so I think this is totally necessary. Otherwise, it's going to be like you kind of have to do a little thrust with your thumb as opposed to a swipe like this. You have to kind of thrust up and kind of reach up and pull down. It's just much easier to do it with a nice swipe like so. You can go a little overboard with the profile though. So if you get one that is extra long, then you can run into a problem where maybe it doesn't, feel nice in your hands. Some people like to ride the safety while they're shooting. I tend to do that. Some people don't like to do that, and if it's a little too wide, they might find themselves inadvertently putting the safety back on while they're shooting, which would be not good. So, there's not a right or wrong answer, but I like the extended safety on this one. This one feels good to me. This next area is checkering. So checkering, we referred to it back here. This Mainspring housing has checkering. You can also get checkering on the front strap here. So this does not have any checkering. You have to go up another tier of product to get the checkering on the Springfield guns. However, so just to give you a little idea of the naming conventions for these. So at the bottom is GI, that's tier 1, or let's say bottom tier, tier 1. Next level up, tier 2, is the loaded series, which has these front serrations, it's got night sights, it has the extended Beavertail safety, and it has a flat mainspring housing, and it has this kind of extended trigger. When you go up to the next tier, which is the TRP, Tactical Response Pistol, that one does have some very sharp checkering cut into the front strap here, and it really locks your hand in. It makes it so that when you're shooting, as the gun is trying to come out of your hands and flip up like this, it's going to really drag on your fingers right along here. And I shot that gun. Fortunately, a friend of mine had one and he let me shoot it, and I gotta tell you, it was too sharp, that particular gun, the TRP. And it's got a pretty good reputation for being too sharp. And by too sharp, I mean too sharp for me. You might like it. He likes it. And many people find that front checkering is a must in their mind. However, I find that I don't want it, at least not to the sharpness that he had. I haven't shot enough 1911s to know what level of sharpness would be acceptable to me. However, I don't really want any checkering right here. It will make it so that your muzzle rises a little less. You'll have a little bit better control of your gun. You'll have better control of it if your hands get wet or sweaty. But for me, I am perfectly happy with having a smooth front strap here. That's just my preference. But if you do end up choosing one with checkering, make sure that it is something that you like and you can rub your hands against it and not feel like it cuts into your hands. It's important. Next thing we should cover is sights. So sights are usually pretty changeable on 1911s, at least the higher end ones. So I think on GI ones, on GI style guns, the front sight I think might be fixed, meaning you can't change it very easily. And it'll all depend on the particular manufacturer, but I think the front sight is generally fixed. And I think the rear sight can be drifted out. It's got a dovetail like one of these. These, I believe, are called Novak sights, which basically means that they have they kind of rest. They rest on the back of the sight here. So here's the dovetail, right here. That's where you would drift those sights in. But they also have a flat that is cut onto the top of the slide to rest the back portion here, so that it extends back, therefore giving you the furthest sight radius. At least that's what I think they're going for here. These particular ones are night sights, so they glow in the dark. Hopefully you can see that a little bit. You might not be able to see the glow in the dark factor of it. Turn off the light. Maybe you can see that, I'm not sure exactly. They glow in the dark, they're tritium. Night sights are a nice option. I would say if you have some, there are some GI style sights that I think are very not good, meaning they're so fine and so hard to see, at least with my eyes, that I find myself kind of holding my gun out there. Where oh, there they, okay, got them. Whereas these sights are nice and forgiving. They've got a nice big channel there. The front sight is fairly large. They got the 3 dots. I like 3-dot sights. However, sights are typically something you can change very easily, but I would say you should pick a gun that has the sights you want already. That way you don't have to go and change them, just for convenience sake. Sights can be made of metal or polymer, though typically on 1911s I think they are made of metal. I think it's, I can't think of anyone that I've seen that is made of polymer. That's more of a feature of many polymer guns. Many polymer guns will have a, polymer sights. But that's something you can change, so don't feel like, unless your front sight is, built into the gun, you could change these features pretty easily. If you wanted these sights, the Novak sights, you have to make sure that your slide is cut for Novak sights, meaning I think it's got a flat underneath where the sight would be. It's got a piece of metal cut off at the top of the slide so that these sights can sit on there. Otherwise, you would not be able to put on these sights. And the final feature that I think, I don't even know if it's really worth covering, but we'll cover it just because it's kind of interesting, is the use of a full-length or GI style guide rod. So a guide rod, you can see it on this gun, is this piece right here. Now with the guide rod, well, let's go back a little bit. The original 1911 and many 1911s nowadays have what is called a GI guide rod, meaning instead of having this full-length piece of metal down here, instead it does not have that, and it just, like when you retract the slide like this, you would be able to see this piece wouldn't be here. It would just be the barrel, like that. Now, there's nothing wrong with a GI guide rod. People talk about that these give you a little extra weight in the front, and if your gun is fairly light, that would definitely be a factor of keeping a little weight in the front will reduce your muzzle flip just a bit. However, it's pretty close. Like, the overall weight of adding this little piece of metal is not that much, so it might not make that big a deal, but it is there. There's some weight in the front, so that can be a feature that you might like. For most people, it's just aesthetic. So some people like having this metal guide rod sticking out with their stainless barrel. It does make it a little, I think, a little more complicated to take it apart. At least that's just my opinion. This particular one is a 2-piece guide rod. So you see it's got a little bit of, it's got a place there to put an Allen key, an Allen head screwdriver. So you can take this guide rod out, and it would look more like this. This is kind of what a GI style guide rod looks like. So when you let it go forward, this is supposed to have the guide rod in it. So I'm not exactly sure what's going to be happening, but you can hear that that guide rod was supporting the spring from jumbling around inside there. So it definitely sounds different. You can definitely hear the grittiness of having that recoil spring moving around inside there. Typically, full-length guide rods will make your disassembly a little bit more complicated, meaning you just have to learn a different method of taking your gun apart. It's not as simple as many people like, and I think simplicity is good on these guns. So when you're looking at it from the front, There's also another type of 1911 called a bull barrel that doesn't have one of these bushings right here. So the bushing is this piece of metal that is kind of shaped like, I don't know, kind of like a horseshoe, I guess, almost. That piece right there. And it basically is guiding the slide to keep nice and tight with the barrel. Otherwise there'd be movement around the movement of the barrel inside the slide. So those are some things to think about when you're picking a 1911 that has the features that you want. And when I purchased this gun, I was choosing it partly because of the features of the gun. I absolutely knew that I wanted an extended beavertail safety, and front serrations actually is something we didn't cover. So front serrations are basically, people like them, one, for looks, people just like the look of them, but also because people, when you insert your magazine with your rounds in it, you rack your round in there, let's say, and now you want to check to see if you have a round chambered. On this particular gun, you've got a little loaded chamber indicator there, but let's say you wanted to check, you can come up here, you can pull back slightly on the slide here, and you can do what's called a press check. That's basically where you're looking inside to see, is there really a round in the chamber? You can do the same thing by pulling back on the slide back here. Just people get a little better leverage and their hand is out of the way of their ejection port so they can see better in there. You can also do it underneath as well. Just different ways to do the same thing. One other minor feature, the takedown lever, I guess that's not really what it's called, the slide release, slide lock, this lever right here, it goes through the gun on both sides and it jets out on this side. And when you're disassembling the gun, you would push this out. This one does not have a little fence to keep it protected from your finger. So if you're somebody who likes to rest their finger there for some reason, probably a left-handed shooter might rest their finger there. You don't want to push on that little button, because if your slide comes back to the right point, you can inadvertently get your slide caught like so. And you'd have to put it back in. So that's another little minor feature, but maybe it's important to you, just something to think about. So there's a lot of features on this gun, right? You know, we didn't even talk about the grip panels, but the nice thing about grip panels is they are totally changeable, so long as you have the basic government size 1911. So this is government size, meaning full size with a 5-inch barrel, I believe. This is the full size. This is what most 1911s are. You can get smaller ones if you wanted to conceal it or, you know, whatever, but most 1911s run on the government size. And most, the government size also shares with the, I think the commander size, which is basically the same frame here, but a shorter barrel, I believe. I believe that's called commander. There's also officer, which is even smaller, I believe. And I say I believe because I always get the two confused, so you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but commander is just a little bit shorter here. Officer is shorter in both dimensions. So the commander and the full size use the same grip panels generally. There's some other minor variations, like a bobtail, if you had a little cut right here from the frame, so the frame kind of rounds off, like rounds like this. And that's to prevent as much printing. You know, if your gun is sitting in your holster there and your shirt is butting up against it, this piece right here is the part that's going to print the most on every gun. For me, the most important factors for me, oh, by the way, magazines are pretty much all interchangeable. This is kind of the GI style magazine. It's all steel and it has these types of followers. You can get other magazines that don't have this type of follower with this little kind of prong like this. All 1911s pretty much use the same magazines, so long as they're single stack, meaning one column. There are also double stack magazines that are wider, but generally most 1911s are single stack. These ones are flush with the bottom. You can also get ones that are extended to make it 8 rounds capacity instead of 7 round capacity. However, pretty much all 1911 magazines are interchangeable, so you can always buy other magazines if you want to. That is the easiest thing to change on one of these, as well as grips. Grips are pretty much all interchangeable. You can change these to being, these are G10 and they're kind of sharp checkering, sharp diamond. You can get way more aggressive ones than this, or you get way smoother ones than this, just depending on your preference. You know, honestly, I think these look good on this gun. However, the wood that came with it also looked good. So, you know, I kind of go back and forth on which ones I like the best. And, you know, don't make grips. Grips are not the thing that define a 1911. You can always get the grips pretty much that you want aftermarket. So don't feel like that is the thing that makes this gun unique. That's super easy to change. For me, the most important feature, once again, the Beavertail grip safety. The extended safety is also pretty darn important. I'd say it's a must. The front serrations are cool. I like them. However, I almost never do a press check personally. But if you are someone who likes to do that, this definitely makes it a little easier. The sights are good. I would say definitely get some sights that are large. Don't go for the GI style sights that are like super short. I have a Browning high power from like the 70s, and oh my gosh, the sights are like little teeny tiny rear sight and little teeny tiny front blade, and I'm like, oh my gosh, where there it is. It takes me so long to find those darn sights. So get some big sights. I personally like the 3-dot sights, but some people like ones where it's like a dot on the bottom and a dot on the top, and you line them up. Those are usually called like straight 8 sights, I believe. I believe Heine makes those. So, you know, the bad thing is that there's so many choices with these 1911s, and so many makers make them. We didn't even talk about the rail. You know, the rail, I keep missing so many things. The rail is also a feature that might be important to you. If you're going to use this as like your home defense gun and you want a light, then a rail is pretty much a must. A rail would be Picatinny section right here, the 1913 rail. It just allows you to mount accessories. Usually people mount a light, a flashlight, a weapon-mounted light here. That way you have a light integrated into your gun. You want to be mindful if you're going to carry those types of guns that, you know, it's not enough to just have the gun with a rail. You also have to find a gun, you have to find a holster that fits both the gun and the weapon light that you're going to attach to it. So for example, I think the two most common weapon lights are the TLR1 HL, that's the Streamlight, and then the Surefire X300U. Those are kind of the two most popular size lights, most popular lights. There are others, but those are the most popular that people make holsters for. And so you want to make sure that if you're going to get a light and you're going to carry it, then make sure you can find a holster for it, because a carry gun is not as useful if you don't have a holster. It's getting close to being useless. If you don't have a holster for it, that's a necessity. So I hope this has been helpful for you. You know, there's so much personal preference. It's not really like you must get these things, you shouldn't get these things. Magwell, didn't even talk about a Magwell. Magwell is also something you can get. That's basically some funneling to make it easier to insert your magazine. So this one has like a little lip right here. A Magwell is a piece that attaches that really extends out this shape right here, the bottom of your grip, and makes it so you can be a little less precise inserting your magazine. You know, this one, if you don't get it just right, you can find that it doesn't go into your gun as well. So a Magwell helps by giving you a little extra guidance to allow it to get in there. But it also adds a little bit extra beefiness to the bottom, so it's perhaps not as good to carry. And it also makes it so that you, I believe, either can't or perhaps don't want to use the GI style magazines, because they will kind of be obscured by the Magwell on the side, so you can't really get it all the way in there for one. You'd have to use the extended mags because you couldn't smack it all the way up because your hand would stop right here. I've been very happy with this Springfield. I've had another Springfield. I've had the GI version. I've had the GI version, and I've shot my friends who has the same gun but a newer iteration of it. And this gun has just been 100% reliable. You know, many 1911s, because they want to be so tightly fitted to get tighter accuracy, sometimes sacrifice a little bit in reliability. So I much prefer having a gun that is reliable, that is not, you know, supremely accurate. Let's say this gun is way more accurate than I can be consistently. So I'm perfectly happy with the accuracy of this gun, and I'm tickled that it is, you know, 100% reliable. If I keep it nice and lubed, keep it clean, this gun works really, really well, and I really like it. Hope this has been helpful for you. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.